Today we are going to talk about, in my opinion, one of the craziest purchases I've ever made when it comes to camera filming gear. I think when you really think about the timing of this purchase, you would think it is probably just as insane as I think it is. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite lenses that I own but never use. And that today is going to be the 10-25 Leica Lumix Micro Four Thirds lens. Now, there are a plethora of reasons out there why this could be the craziest purchase I've ever made, and there are a number of reasons as well that I made this purchase. Back when I made this purchase, I did not own any of my full frame cameras yet using the L-Mount Alliance. I only own G85s, which I haven't used in over a year, which sounds crazy because that camera is like 10 years old or something. And then I own the GH5 Mark II, my premier camera that I had, and I thought I was going to take over the world with that camera. Now, unfortunately, due to a lot of laziness and, just not doing anything, I didn't do a whole lot, but it did get me started, obviously, on my wedding filmmaking journey. While filming one of my first weddings, my favorite lens out there was the 25mm f1.7. That was from Lumix. It's a $150 lens almost anytime you see it online for sale. I think it's a $250 to $300 lens, but it's always on sale for some reason, or maybe even $150 is the normal price for it now. But I realized I wanted something different. While I love the 50mm focal length, which is what that 25mm equals in a full frame lens, I wanted something that was a little more versatile and something I was hoping would be cleaner, sharper, and overall just a much better lens. So while doing a bunch of research, I came across this guy. This guy, 10-25 f1.7 all the way through if you want it to be, and we'll go over some specs of this lens in just a moment. I thought this is it. For the price of this lens, it had to have been the best lens that anybody has ever seen in their lives. Now, when compared to a lot of the obviously cinema lenses that are out there, some of the even Sony lenses, some of the Canon lenses, no, this lens is not even close to some of the prices of those for some reason. But when it comes to Micro Four Thirds lenses, this is by far the most expensive lens out there, as far as I know. And if you know any different, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. But I've been working on Micro Four Thirds for a while, and there's no chance that there could be any lens that costs more than this one. Now, what I want to do is go over some of the things I like about the lens, and obviously, like everything that I kind of review on this channel, some things I don't like. There's not a whole lot not to like about this lens, while there is a lot more to love about this lens. So we're going to talk about those now. First and foremost, as expected, the clarity and sharpness out of this lens is fantastic. I typically shoot a lot in some low light situations, and while that 25 1.7mm lens that I was working on is a fantastic lens, it looks great for $150. You can't go wrong. It's one of the draws to that Micro Four Thirds system. I needed something that sometimes was wider. I like to do some streaming every now and then, whether that's streaming video games. I do a fantasy football kind of weekly roundup of how terrible all of our scores are, or in most cases, how terrible everybody else's scores are. And I wanted something that could get a little wider with that 25mm lens. It's very tight, and it's, something I can't really stream with unless I can set my camera about 100 yards away, it seems like sometimes. And so for me, I wanted something a little wider without using my 12-60 kit lens that came with my G85s or any number of lenses kind of in between that I just didn't have at that 1.7 because of low light, because of Micro Four Thirds sensors needing extra light. I wanted to make sure that I could have something that's nice and wide, but also at that aperture that I really needed in low light situations, and also make things just look great with the bokeh that you can get out of them. And that all brings me to one of the next points about it. Like I said, the focal length is something that I needed all the way through this. This is a 10-25mm lens, which is a 20-50 equivalent. So that 20, just as a kit lens that I have with the S5 and S5 II, it meets those standards as well, with that 20mm being pretty wide for me. I don't think I've ever needed anything wider than that. I have found myself sometimes wanting just a little bit wider, especially when it comes to those lenses, because as I noted in my previous video, I don't use that 20-60 often. I use mainly my 24-70 Sigma lens. So sometimes having that slightly wider lens I'm sure would be beneficial, but for me, the 20 mil is right in that sweet spot of having just wide enough lenses to do anything that I need to do. And then going through, you kind of get up to that 35 mil equivalent, and then all the way to that 50, which again, as I've noted before, it's my favorite focal length. So for me, having that versatility and 1.7 all the way through, in case I need it for those low light situations, and I want to make sure that only my subject is in focus and everything else is as blown out as you could possibly get on a Micro Four Thirds, this lens does that. Outside of the features that we've talked about already, being a 1.7 all the way through, it's sharp, it's clear, it's clean, it's crystal, it has a great focal length. One of the things that I absolutely love about this lens is its build quality. This thing feels incredible in the hands. When I come from the 25 millimeter lens from Lumix, that's just a $150 lens, or the kit lens that comes with that, or even some of my zoom lenses, the 14 to 150, I believe it is, and the 70 to 200 equivalent, so the 35 to 100. This thing is, it feels like it's all metal, except for the cap on it. It is plastic, obviously glass for the lens, and it just feels professional. Like the first time I put my hands on this, I thought I put my hands on an actual cinema lens. Like for me, that was the step in saying, I made it. I made it to the big leagues. I am now a videographer. One of the other things I love about the build quality of this lens is the aperture ring itself is declicked. The only time you get a click is if you go to like an auto aperture setting on this. Other than that, it's a very, very smooth, but it has that tension that you know comes kind of with quality. Back in the day, I used to love getting head units or stereos that some people call them for cars. And I used to, you know, if the knob didn't feel good, for me, that meant it just was cheap or just something I didn't like. It needed a tension kind of feel, the same as I use for my house stereos. I want to make sure those knobs don't just kind of roll through. I want some tension to it to kind of feel that quality of whatever potentiometer or whatever's behind that volume. I want to make sure I could feel that. And there's no exception when it comes to this lens, when it comes to setting your aperture. Again, 1.7 all the way up to 16. If not, you have a one click and you can go to the automatic setting on this. And the same for when it comes to focusing. The focus has a clutch ring, which I've never experienced before. I wonder, where do you even focus this thing at? You can kind of see it, but you had no idea kind of what you were doing. But once you kind of pull the clutch down, that engages the manual focus on this lens. So even if you're on autofocus on your camera, you just pull that down, it quickly engages the manual focus. And then you also have a distance rating on the lens itself, telling you how many feet or meters you are away from the subject that you are trying to focus on. And then last but not least is the zoom. Unlike the 24 to 70, it is a normal right to go further, left to come closer or wider rather. And it is a very, very smooth turn as well. I get no hiccups, no catches, anything like that. It's obviously, once again, a very expensive lens. It is well built, and it proves when you are using any of these functions on this lens and then holding in your hands. Like I said, it's an all metal kind of setup here, and it feels fantastic. I absolutely love it. Every time I put my hands on it, I wish I used my Micro Four Thirds stuff just a little bit more just to utilize this lens. But of course, there are some cons with it, and we'll go over those soon. Now, just another couple quick notes on this. This does have a 77 millimeter filter thread, so unlike any of my Micro Four Thirds lenses, this is by far the biggest out of them. Most of those are in the 52 and even some are in like the 46 range, I believe, on like the 25 millimeter focal length. And of course, one more thing that we can't forget, this is a Lumix branded lens, but it is Leica certified. It is with an alliance with Leica that you would see even with the L-mount lenses. Most of those are kind of denoted by some of the gold writing, if you could see it there, with sort of that red dot on there to let you know this is a Leica certified lens. So if you are working with people in the field and they're aware of something like that, and you kind of pull this big bad boy out, they can see that gold writing and know you're working with the good stuff, or so you think. With that, we want to talk about some cons of this lens. One of the biggest things about this lens that I don't like, but I completely understand, is its size. What I want to do real quick is kind of compare a few lenses just to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Now, this is the 10 to 25 Leica variant Lumix lens here, and this is my 24 to 70. My 24 to 70 can almost be slightly shorter. It's not quite as round as the Leica lens, and it It isn't as heavy, but it still has quite a bit of weight when you compare it to other micro four thirds lenses. The fact that I can get a 24 to 70 millimeter, kind of look out of this at just a 2.8, this 1.7 is much wider, and it's just about the same size as the 24 to 70. And I find that kind of crazy when you really look at it. You could get so much more versatility out of this than you can this. And that is something that kind of made me think, what was I thinking when I bought this lens? But we'll get to that in just a moment. A couple of other lenses I want to talk about here. This here is the 25 millimeter equivalent on the micro four thirds. It is tiny. When you compare it to this, that is what you get with a 25 millimeter lens. This is $150. The only thing it has on it is just the focus ring on it. It has the tiniest filter thread I've ever seen on a lens, which for this one is one of the ones I was talking about. This is the 46 millimeter. It's super small in comparison to this. And quite honestly, they have a similar look, which we will be looking at a bit later in this video. I am going to go ahead and compare these two just kind of side by side, give you kind of what this looks like, especially in a setting like this. But this is a bit crazy, that the size comparison is one of the reasons to get a micro four thirds camera. This is something you can just throw on a camera, go out with, never have to worry about having this big bulky setup with you. Again, you got a much more versatile lens here, but to kind of compare, especially if you're going to go on any type of shoot and you know that your favorite focal length is 50 anyways, why not just take this over this? And then another comparison I want to make here, this is the 42.5. I cannot figure out how to say this, Yongnuo lens. This is a kind of a cheaper Amazon special, just a slightly bigger than the 25 mil lens. This is an 85 millimeter equivalent. And once again, kind of a size comparison, much smaller. So we're going to get 85 millimeters out of this compared to this bad boy. So you can see where the drawback could be of getting a lens like this. Now, one of the other things to think about this lens, just real quick too, is while sure, there are some drawbacks to it when it comes to that, and compared to that 25 millimeter lens, especially in size, to me, even though the GH5 Mark II and certainly the G85's, the autofocus simply just does not perform as well as people would like it to. But for me, this lens just being a little bit better built, a little bit sharper, it kind of helps with that situation. It makes it seem like the autofocus is slightly better. Again, we'll kind of test that in this scenario in just a few moments. But to me, it kind of seems like it definitely does better when it comes to the autofocus performance. It seems like I don't have as many issues, especially when I need to get up through those ranges compared to some of the other lenses like the 12 to 60 kit lens. It makes it to where you could definitely focus a lot better, let in more light, and make sure the contrast detection is there. So I guess that's another kind of positive to this lens. It definitely helps. But again, is it worth it? So that brings me to kind of my last point about this lens. It's $1,800. Now, if you remember at the beginning of this video, I said this is probably the craziest purchase I ever made when it came to camera gear because of the price. $1,800 for this brand new. I think I see them used for only as low as about $1,500 to even sometimes still $1,700 in great condition. At the time that I bought this, if I'm not mistaken, either the S5 II was already out or it was just about to come out. So for nearly the same price, I could have got a new camera. And in some of these sales that we see today, I could have gotten the camera with a lens that sure might have not been 1.7 like this. Maybe if you got the 50 millimeter for free, which would basically take over a lens like this and is still much smaller than this lens, then absolutely, this is a ridiculous purchase in my opinion. At the time, I know for sure the original S5 was out, a camera I own, a camera I love. I think it does well. Obviously, it still lacks in that autofocus department, but it's still slightly better than the Micro Four Thirds cameras that I have, and image quality is much better than the GH5 Mark II and certainly far beyond what the G85 can produce. So for me, this is definitely a crazy purchase. Why would anybody do that? It's insane to think about the fact that I could have gotten a brand new, much better camera system over the purchase of just this one lens, a lens that I don't even use anymore. This lens doesn't come with me to weddings. It doesn't come with me to any professional shoots. Most of my cameras, again, my A and B are the S5 II and the S5. And then I do have the C cam with the GH5 Mark II, especially when it comes to ceremony footage. But for me, I use a 70-200 equivalent on that camera because it's one of my bride and groom cams. So I don't use this at all. This lens almost never gets touched. It is a very expensive paperweight that I own right now, but I can't bring myself to sell it, and I don't know why. Part of it is I don't think I'd get the value back in the lens. I don't know who to even market this thing to, especially for the cons that I have for this lens. The size for a Micro Four Thirds outweighs every single lens that I own for Micro Four Thirds, and probably every single lens that is out there for Micro Four Thirds, barring maybe getting some sort of cinema lens that fits a Micro Four Thirds camera, or even some of the anamorphics. Weight might be the same, but they're still much smaller when it comes to those lenses. I think if you have Micro Four Thirds and you don't plan on switching and you do want the best possible lens you can get this lens. They make this in the 10 to 25, so the 20 to 50 millimeter equivalent. I know there are a lot of people out there that absolutely love their Micro Four Thirds. They refuse to switch to a full frame. There's no way that anybody can convince them that anything is better out there. And for some parts, that's true. The new G9 Mark II from Lumix is a fantastic camera. We get the new autofocus. We get a little bit better low light performance, the best in-body stabilization you could possibly imagine, all within the same price as pretty much the S5 Mark II. So to pair that camera with this lens, which is something I've thought about, maybe stick with some Micro Four Thirds since I already own lenses for it, something light and easy to carry around, and maybe on professional shoots. I still have the G9 Mark II. I compare it with this lens, and I have a beast of a setup. But for me, owning the other full frames, it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime soon. Don't think it's worth the price. If this was half the price, or maybe about $1,200 when you compare it to some of the other lenses out there, like the Leica variant 35 to 100 from Lumix with the Micro Four Thirds, those are about $799. Maybe make this $1,000 or so, maybe $1,200 on the absolute high end. Outside of that, I don't think it's worth $1,800. I think it's the most expensive thing I've ever bought that I don't even use anymore. I will go ahead and do a side-by-side comparison now of those lenses, talk it through a little bit of this and that 25 so you can at least see what it looks like. All right, so here's kind of a look of what this lens looks like. I've got it at the same focal length that I just recorded the last video on, so we can kind of do a comparison, especially between this lens, obviously with the limitations of the GH5 Mark II and the S5 Mark II that I have with the 50 millimeter 1.8. So slightly a little bit more light. ISO obviously is much lower because the GH5 Mark II cannot go up to what my S5 Mark II comes up to, but you can kind of see a comparison here. I'll probably do a little bit B-roll of what it looks like with the 25 mil on there as well, but this is it. Hopefully autofocus is working fine. We do have it obviously in completely auto, no manual. I've got it all the way open at 1.7 here, but same lighting scenario. So hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of what you could expect if you were to also purchase this lens. Again, in my opinion, it's not worth the amount of money. I think it should be about $600 to $700 cheaper at least. I mean, with that extra kind of money, you could get the 35 to 100, which looks like it's a fantastic lens, something I want to pick up. It's kind of their Mark III that's also got the Leica name on it to hopefully be a little bit better of a lens, especially when it comes to me, for knowing that I'm not going to be upgrading my third camera anytime soon. Why not get that kind of nicer setup for the 7200 for the wedding scenario? If I was out to a wedding shoot or a professional shoot and this is the only camera I had, just again, this is a lens I could see myself using. It's got some weight to it, so it'll help with stabilization. Didn't say it earlier, but wanted to note real quick that there is no OIS on this lens, so you only get body stabilization. But of course, the Micro Four Thirds does really well at stabilizing on its own. Obviously, with the added OIS, it would help stabilize a little more, but as heavy as this lens is, you want to make sure you're obviously still careful with it. It works great. It looks great. In my opinion, I'm going to find out even more because I haven't even seen this lens on in a while. We'll compare it. I'm going to be going to do a side-by-side real quick as I'm talking through of what it looks like with the 25 on here. I just won't be saying anything. But this lens, again, fantastic lens. It looks great. There are a lot of pros to it. Just some of those cons, I think, in my opinion, outweighed those pros. If you guys have any questions about this lens, please leave it down in the comments below. If you've liked what you've seen throughout this video, please give me a thumbs up. Go ahead and drop a subscription if you haven't already subscribed to this video, or rather to this channel. And once again, trying to pump out weekly content at least on this channel, so at least a subscription kind of makes sense. You'll get some insight from kind of a beginner filmmaker, and this is a prime example of one of those thoughts of mine to not make purchases because you think it's going to be that much better. Once again, I could have got away with that 25 millimeter $150 lens I can't even do the math right now. It's got to be a 20th of the price of what this lens costs. Just don't do it. Again, unless you are a micro four thirds person and you refuse to upgrade to anything else and you are sticking with it until the day you die, don't purchase this lens. I think if you do, absolutely go secondhand on it. Try to find it at a good price. If you can find it under $1,500 or $1,400, go get it. It's worth it in my opinion at that price point, especially if it was taken care of. But at the price that it's at now, I don't see it. I don't see it at all. Again, great looking lens. It's fantastic. It's just overly expensive, and I could have obviously upgraded to a full frame setup for the same price. Thanks again, guys. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.